Okay, so that was for the people that needed a reminder why sleep is important. Now, when I talk about sleep and I run workshops on it, there's usually actually quite a lot of people that come on and say, I know that sleep is important. Now you're stressing me out even more. I just cannot sleep. I know it's important. I go to bed and then I toss and turn or wake up early. So the rest of the session I'll be talking more about what the underlying biology, why can't you sleep? And then what can you do with diet and lifestyle changes to support that sleep better? Okay, so the most common and the most difficult one to deal with is perfectionism, rumination, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then there's obviously, you'll need some cognitive behavioral therapy, some life coaching. You're obviously in the right place for that. So that part I won't be discussing a lot today, that there might be certain triggers that just keep you thinking over and over certain situations while you try and go to sleep, and that keeps you awake. But what I will be talking about more today is the underlying biology. That's what functional medicine really deals with. It helps fix the underlying biology and our brain biology so that then we can incorporate those cognitive behavioral therapy changes or other life cognitive coaching skills that you might be taught. You can then implement them better because your brain is balanced and has the right neurotransmitter, serotonin, dopamine to be happy and healthy and actually be able to make those changes. Now, as it pertains to sleep, I will be talking a little bit about the chemicals that are most important for our sleep and what can mess with those chemicals. Now, you might have heard about melatonin. I'm pretty sure you have. That's obviously our main sleep neurotransmitter. You can see this curve here. This is our daily cortisol melatonin cycle. You see the red line here, that's our melatonin. Here, 6 a.m. it drops. We usually wake up. It should be really low all day long. And then when it gets dark, it starts to rise again. And as you can see, it's the complete opposite to cortisol. Cortisol being our main stress hormone, fight or flight hormone. And they kind of work in that one can only be up if the other one's down. And so you can't pump out nice melatonin at night if cortisol is high. Now, there's another messenger chemical in the brain that helps us calm down and get us to sleep better, and that's GABA. Not sure if you heard of that one. I'll talk a little more about it later. And then there's some opposing chemicals that oppose melatonin and GABA and make it really difficult for us to sleep if they're high. And the first one's cortisol. I've already mentioned that, our main stress hormone, but also adrenaline and also histamine. And that's the one that I find often when patients come to me and say they've tried everything and they can't sleep, then that's often a missing link. And I'll talk about histamine in a second, but what they do if they're high, they avoid the body just can't make enough melatonin and GABA, and then we have issues with sleeping and staying asleep. So this is how the curve should be. I talked about it. This is a cortisol curve. This is how it would nicely be if someone is healthy and not stressed, which is a rarity, sadly, these days. But this is what I see with some of my patients. These are just examples of their test results. This is what it should look like. It should rise in the morning, the cortisol, and then come down. Sometimes people wake up and they have this anticipatory stress. They wake up and they're super stressed out already. And then they're kind of having this dip and are being super depleted. And then in the afternoon, they're getting this second wind. Here in the evening, all of a sudden the cortisol rises again. So this is a person that had trouble sleeping because instead of it being low in the morning after nice restful sleep and then rising, the cortisol did the wrong thing. Similar here, that person starts off really low with cortisol, so they're probably quite tired in the morning, but then they ramp themselves up, maybe pack a bunch of coffee in there or anything else to get them going. By afternoon, they've managed to get their cortisol levels up, so they're probably awake, but probably wired. It's too high, and then it is really hard for them to go to sleep because it stays up too late at night. Those are just examples. So I talked about perfectionism, rumination, PTSD before, but the interesting thing is actually that our brain can't distinguish between real and perceived stress. So whether we have these thoughts in the brain that tell us that we are being stressed, that mess with our sleep and make the cortisol curve go all wonky here, or whether it is actually something else. So I always like to refer to that tiger. You might remember from biology class that we, as a very basic breakdown, we have the fight or flight mode, the sympathetic nervous system, where we run away from a perceived tiger. It's really important. We pump out adrenaline, cortisol, and our body sends all the nutrients to our muscles, mostly in our heart, so that we can run away from the tiger. That opposes the parasympathetic, the rest, digest, and heal mode, which does the opposite. It sends signals to our digestive tract, to our reproductive organs, and it helps us heal, digest, be fertile, have nice, healthy hormones. And our brain it's mostly in one or the other. It can't be in both. So when we're pumping out cortisol, we're stressed and we can't do the healing and repairing. Now, the reason I have this slide here is that our body can't distinguish between what is a real stressor and what is a biological stressor. So if there's something inside the body that is causing us to be inflamed, such as mold exposure or hidden food intolerances or imbalances in our gut microbiome, people by now have often heard about it, that we have these bacteria in the gut and some type of fungus helps us break down foods. It's really important, but if we have the wrong type in there, and we have an overgrowth of certain bacteria that are bad, or parasites, or candida, which is a type of fungus, if they grow over, then it actually signals to our brain that we should be in fight or flight mode. There's a tiger chasing us. Same for heavy metals and pollution around us. They all send the similar signals to the brain that we are under attack, similar to if we have ruminating thoughts or PTSD or a spouse or a boss or whatever, stressful work deadline, whatever it might be, or financial burden. They all act as a similar stressor to our brain and then send signals to the rest of the body that it isn't safe to reproduce, digest. So I see a lot of people with chronic stress having issues with their IBS and fertility hormones, but also sleep, because that cortisol stays up when it should come down. Now here I also have histamine, and I mentioned that one before, and I'll get to that in a moment more. Another thing that can signal stress to our body are nutrient deficiencies. If we don't have the right amount of nutrients, then our body again thinks it's being under attack, it's starving, and it pumps out the stress response to run away and go and find food and find the right nutrients. Yeah. Okay, good. Next one here, the gut-brain axis, where histamine comes in. So I briefly mentioned the gut microbiome before. These are all little bugs in our gut. We want them. They help to break down foods. They help to assimilate and make certain nutrients and vitamins. They're wonderful. But if we have the wrong type in there, then the whole gut can become slightly inflamed and starts to produce histamine. And I see often that people with sleep issues, they have this histamine problem. And one part of that puzzle is the gut microbiome not doing its thing properly. And all of a sudden, we start to develop food intolerances and start to develop allergies to foods that are healthy, like almonds or apples. Oftentimes people then also have really high allergic symptoms to pollen. I see this quite commonly. All these very strong hay fever reactions, they are a histamine intolerance, a histamine overload. And oftentimes it comes back to the gut microbiome not working that well. Now, if we, for whatever reason, have high histamine in the body from these pollen, hay fever issues, from gut issues, from chronic infections, food intolerances that the body mistakenly thinks are an issue, then it pumps out histamine, and that will mess with our melatonin being able to rise at night. So then we might be doing all the other things right, and we just can't get to sleep because our thoughts are racing at night. It also makes it harder for us to do cognitive behavioral therapy, make choices during the day, because our brain is racing, and histamine makes us overreactive. Okay, another very common underlying factor for sleep issues are blood sugar imbalances. Now, what we want to have is a really nice, this green curve here. We want this nice green steady curve throughout the day, blood sugar staying nice and steady. What usually happens in a lot of people is that they start their morning with coffee and porridge, and they get a blood sugar spike, and then a few hours later that's been burned, so then they start to dip and they get really hangry and they need more food and they get irritable, and then they eat something else sugary. They might even think it's something healthy. They might grab for an apple on its own, or for some risotto or for some rice, things like that. I see that very commonly. And that's another blood sugar spike. And then they get onto this blood sugar roller coaster. Now, what research shows is that inflames us, which messes with our sleep. It also messes with our gut microbiome, making us more prone to have the wrong bugs in there, candida, fungal infections, which messes with our sleep. But it also in itself, if we have constant blood sugar spikes throughout the day, we are more prone to having a called reactive hypoglycemia at night, where our blood sugar drops in the middle of the night because we've had all these spikes all day and our body's just not used to having a stable blood sugar, and then we wake up because the body thinks it's starving. So that's another common thing. Okay, a few others before I start talking about what you can actually do. So I mentioned nutrients are important, and if we don't have the right nutrients, then our body might be stressed, thinking it's starving. But also nutrients are important as building blocks for those messenger chemicals. So we actually, to make enough melatonin and GABA and to break down the cortisol, adrenaline, and histamine, we need certain nutrients. And this is a whole big list, and if you like, you can you can reach out after, and I can send you a summary of that to test for. But what research shows, certain nutrients that are often commonly associated with poor sleep quality and sleep issues are vitamin D is very common. And vitamin D not just being in the normal range, but ideally it should be in the optimal range. Then obviously having not enough melatonin, so you can have, there's certain foods that like tart cherry that actually are a direct precursor to melatonin. Vitamin C is also really important to help break down cortisol, help make GABA. B vitamins have been implicated in sleep issues, in particular B6. Also B12, but B12 is a bit of a double-edged sword. If it's too high, like I see sometimes people start to over-supplement and take really high doses of B12 all the time. And if they then also have a gut imbalance, they might make more B12 already. And then that can also lead to insomnia, having too high B12. But too low, too high, not a good idea. So best is always to test and measure. Iron is a really common one, in particular for women that still have a cycle, because we obviously lose blood every month. And I see this very commonly, that women are on the low end of the normal iron range. And the doctor might be saying it's fine, it's no issue, but their cells are struggling to get enough oxygen, which can mess with those getting the right amounts of melatonin at night, breaking down the excitatory neurotransmitters. So just a quick note here. The best way to measure for iron is ferritin. It's the iron storage in blood. And the one problem there is that if you go to your GP and ask for that, they will test that for you. But the normal ferritin range that most labs use is really wide. It can be anywhere between 15 and 300. But for the body to get the right amount of iron and oxygenate all the body and blood so we can sleep perfectly, we can lose weight, have our thyroid function, have our brain function optimally, we actually want that ferritin to be between 70 and 80. So that's one thing, like a lot of these, actually, you want to make sure they're in optimal ranges, not just in the normal range if you go to a general GP. Magnesium helps to calm down the brain at night. Omega-3s, such as found in salmon and sardines, also help to calm down the brain at night, help to get rid of these chronic infections and inflammation that can mess with our sleep biology. Important not to eat too much tuna, because that's actually full of heavy metals, so that can in itself then cause issues with our sleep and our health. Protein. So we'll get to protein in a moment when I talk about what to actually do, but protein is really important for our sleep biology. It acts as a precursor for all the different sleep messenger chemicals. For example, tryptophan is a type of protein. It is needed to make serotonin, which is the precursor for melatonin. Serotonin also makes us calm and happy during the day, so it's also a nice thing for during daytime. But at night, we need to have enough serotonin in the bodies to then make melatonin. Glutamine is also a protein, is needed to make GABA. Tyrosine, another protein needed to make thyroid hormones, so that and noradrenaline in the morning, so we can wake up and get our circadian rhythm going. And then the thyroid is really important also for our metabolism, how we eat, how we sleep, how our body produces. Thyroid is important for our GABA and progesterone. Brings me to the next thing, is progesterone. So what research shows is that oftentimes in particular the second half of the cycle, when we have it, let's roughly 28 days, middle of the cycle, we ovulate. And then the second half, we should, if we have a good ovulation and we have a healthy hormonal balance, we should have nice high levels of progesterone. Now, progesterone is needed to make GABA and make that function properly. Oftentimes women in particular, as they get nearer to menopause, that progesterone drops because their cycle is off, and then it can make it a lot harder for them to sleep. And if you might remember, having lack of sleep messes with our progesterone, so it's kind of this vicious cycle, and we just need to address it from both ends, supporting progesterone. And you have this, I believe, that workshop coming up on how to eat and all of these things, but there's obviously other strategies also to support progesterone. And then sleeping in itself helps progesterone as well. Estrogen and serotonin are also important for sleep quality. They often drop when we get to menopause. So having a really nice balanced cycle and supporting that will help with our sleep. Common underlying reasons for restless legs. This is a common complaint I get, in particular my female clients. First of all is lack of movement, and people often think, oh, this is too simple of a solution, but often people just don't get out and about and don't get their 10,000 steps and don't get moving, and their body just is stagnant and it needs that movement to calm down at night. Also vitamin C and B's and iron, magnesium. If you've worked out and your legs are still restless, maybe take some of these, measure them in blood to see what's going on, and that should be helping with your restless legs. Another common factor is sleep apnea. They're usually linked to inflammation, being obese, oxidative stress, such as from food intolerances, heavy metals, not having enough antioxidants, not a nice vegetable, colorful diet. So, and we'll get to what we can do in a second. Okay, so another few things. I talked about this, female cycle, perimenopause, progesterone, estrogens. I won't dive into that more now. Another underlying factor that is often overlooked, and people think that might be too simple, but it is actually, I talked about the circadian rhythm here, this curve that needs to come up, the cortisol spike, but we need that cortisol to come up first thing in the morning to kickstart all the processes, and we need that melatonin to drop. If this is all wonky here and we start off with the wrong cycle, then the rest will stay really messy and we won't be able to sleep properly. Now, part of that is actually light, and luckily over in Melbourne the weather's a little bit better, and throughout Australia, in the UK, it's a big issue. People just never get daylight, and even if it's sunny outside, sitting inside, working, looking after the kids, and just not being exposed to real sunlight, and then wearing sunglasses all day, it messes with this cycling, because we need, for melatonin to be produced at night, this is actually a 24-hour cycle. So for this to come up, it needs to have had a nice bright light stimulus half a day earlier. So in the morning, we need that bright light for all the kind of mechanisms to start rolling, so that at night we can then produce melatonin. Another common one that most people are aware of, coffee obviously can affect our sleep. But what I even wasn't aware of until I researched sleep in more depth a while ago was that even having coffee at 2 p.m., coffee has a half-life of about 4 to 6 hours. So meaning having coffee at 2, half of that is stored in the body at 7 and a quarter by midnight. So that really can mess with our sleep. And I often see people saying, oh no, I'm fine with it. Maybe do a sleep tracker, and I'll talk about it in a second, and see whether your sleep is actually good quality. So I would often suggest try and stick to coffee before noon, maybe better even before 10 a.m., because then half is is broken down around 3 p.m. and a quarter by 8, which would be perfect. Obviously, some people have genetic mutations that make it harder for coffee to be broken down, and for some it's a little bit quicker. So there is a little bit of a variation, but if you are having trouble sleeping, then maybe look at that as well. Alcohol and late dinners. We don't have time to talk about all these things in detail today, but if you do like a drink, or you sometimes smoke a little bit of cannabis, or have nicotine, which all are obviously toxins to our body, then try and have them the latest stop 4 hours before bedtime, because then the body has some time to get rid of most of it and it doesn't mess with our sleep. Now, people think that drinking alcohol and having a joint might get them to sleep quicker, but the quality of sleep is actually usually very bad once you might pass out, but then your sleep quality is bad and your body can't clean out all the different things. Also, you will be more likely to wake up halfway through the night and then have a very disrupted sleep after. Late dinners is another common cause that I see. Ideally, similar to alcohol and all these things, 4 hours before bed would be ideal. It's often not realistic with social life and family life, but the earlier, the longer time between dinner and bedtime you have, the better for your sleep quality. At least 2 hours, better yet 4. Okay, so this I just mentioned, there are some tracking tools nowadays where I for example, wear this ring. I have no financial ties to them. I just love their product. There's other products out as well. This one's called Aura Ring. It measures your sleep quality. It measures your stress levels, your heart rate variability, which shows whether you're in fight or flight mode or in the resting, digesting, healing mode. It measures your deep sleep and how much of the good quality sleep you've gotten. So I think it's wonderful. I used to live in the south of France and would have a glass of wine most nights, because in Europe, that's what we kind of thought was fine and healthy. And I realized wearing this ring, I think 4 years ago now, I got it. It showed me that my sleep was really bad after that ring, and I just kind of stopped doing that. There's also there are watches you can track your sleep, your heart rate variability. I just personally like a small gadget like that. A few other underlying triggers, and I know we're running closer out of time, so I have to rush through it, is temperature. So if the room is too hot, your body needs to drop at night for it to be able to get into a deep sleep. And actually similar thing happens. Part of why we need to exercise is not just to wear us out and make us tired, but also if we are heating up during the day through exercising or through saunas, then that drop at night of the temperature, having that difference in temperature helps us get a deeper sleep.